Welcome to our Tiger Success Series webcast today. We share leadership training that builds trust, interdependence, genuineness, empathy, risk, and success in the workplace. Here's our host, Diane Crampton.
Welcome, everyone. This is a first in a series of conversations to dig a bit deeper into the webinar we presented on building more accountability for team decision-making outcomes. And if you missed that webinar, send me a message and I will send you the playback link. Today, we are talking about collecting everyone's contributions in decision-making. And we are focusing on the HSP personality and who they are and how to engage their best performance in decision-making processes. So we're going to learn about the HSP personality today, and we'll gain some tips on facilitating decision-making with HSP team members. With me today is William Allen. After achieving a degree in psychology, Bill enjoyed a 30-year career in information technology as a manager at Wells Fargo. He enjoyed managing a highly intelligent, often difficult staff, many of whom were HSP personalities. And Bill has written 3 books on HSP men: The Sensitive Man, Confessions of a Sensitive Man, and his new book on being a sensitive man. So welcome, Bill. It's great having you in this conversation today.
Thanks, Diane. Appreciate being here.
You know, when I first was learning personality surveys and personality assessments, I was familiar with DISC and Meyers-Briggs and others, and never once was the HSP personality identified in that. I can look at the quadrants of personality as presented by DISC, for example, and I can see, a couple of characteristics scattered in the more introverted personality framework.
Right.
But I don't think HSPs are necessarily just introverts. So could you bring us up to speed on what the HSP personality is and how prevalent it is in our society?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of people don't know about this trait. In fact, it wasn't until the mid-90s when Dr. Elaine Aron published her book on highly sensitive people that the trait got some traction and got the recognition that it deserved. It's a trait that's been around since the beginning of time. I mean, since humans have been around. In fact, it's been called an evolutionary type trait, and I'll go into that in just a minute. But it's a temperament trait. These people who have high sensitive personalities are those people that make up about 20 to 30% of the human population. The high sensitive personality, more technically described as sensory processing sensitivity, is a personality trait that has 4 major components to it that are universally shared by all the highly sensitive people out there. And we use this acronym DOES, D-O-E-S, to describe it. Let me go over that real quick. That'll give us a little bit of a baseline and we can talk. And if you have some questions along the way, go ahead and ask me. But the D stands for depth of processing. So highly sensitive people, in spite of sort of the pejorative connotations that are associated sometimes with sensitivity in human beings, they have this amazing capacity to deep dive on information. And we do this deep processing quite a bit. It's rather consuming. If you imagine your computer at home doing a lot of work, like a lot of information is being processed, it can slow down sometimes a little bit. And that's the perception that sometimes people have of highly sensitive people. They're deliberate, thoughtful, deep diving type people. So they take a sort of a deep approach to how they analyze things and go over things. That could be something later on we can talk about in terms of the benefits they bring to the table, especially in a corporate environment. O stands for overstimulation. Now, you can imagine if you're getting a lot more sensory information coming in, our filters for highly sensitive people are a little bit more open. I like to think of it like an aperture on a camera. The more open it is, the more light comes in and hits the film. And that's what happens with highly sensitive people. Some mechanism in the brain is allowing more sensory information to get in. And you take that and couple with this deep processing that we do. And sometimes we become overwhelmed and overstimulated. And so the thing that needs to happen is they need to step aside, take a time out, relax, calm down, whatever it may be, in order to sort of calm themselves and get recalibrated again and able to get back out and working and functioning again. The third letter is E, and that stands for emotional reactivity. Like our thought patterns, highly sensitive people feel things at a very deep level. They love more deeply. They are moved more easily. And conversely, they're also hurt more often because of the deep nature of the way we process emotions. That's the way we're wired. It's not a defect. It's not a disorder, but it's simply the way that we process information, we process emotion. The other side of that letter E is empathy. Highly sensitive people are much more empathetic. And this is something I hear a lot coming out of corporate environments, is that we're looking for more empathetic employees. We're looking for more empathetic leaders. Well, highly sensitive people are very empathetic, and they are like those kind of people that can sense what's going on in somebody else, because the mirror neurons in our brain are evidently more active and allow us to sense and see what's going on with other people in our conversations. And of course, that makes us a bit more empathetic. The final letter is S, and that stands for sensing the subtle. This is the way Dr. Aaron describes it. And that's that ability to pick up nuanced information in the environment. That's that subtle stuff that we would know. And I always use this analogy. If you took a highly sensitive person to a party, they're the one that's going to be noticing that maybe the hors d'oeuvres are too salty, or the music's too loud, or somebody's wearing perfume or cologne, or something across the room that they can sense, and maybe it's a little too strong. They're picking these things up, these very subtle cues from their sensory organs, and they're coming out there. And that has advantages and disadvantages, but nevertheless, it is that sensing the subtle that is also one of those traits. So those four traits are kind of an umbrella of what all highly sensitive people share, that commonality, that ability to process information deeply, that ability to sense things very subtly in the environment, a great degree of empathy and emotion, and the tendency from time to time to be overstimulated because of all that information that's coming in.
So in taking what you just said, through my brain and system, what I'm hearing is that they're possibly very intuitive people.
They're extremely intuitive. Yes.
Very, very intuitive, very empathetic, deeply thoughtful, very aware of the subtle background noise, let's say in an organization, probably aware of interactions with others that didn't go well, or possibly even just sensing that something might not be right with a decision or a problem or whatever it is in the culture or environment that, let's say, the decision-making process is looking to serve. So,
exactly. Yeah.
in And looking at that, let's imagine that you're a manager facilitating a group decision-making process that's going to be taken into planning and plan execution. And you have an HSP personality on your team, but you're not even aware of it. I mean, you know DISC maybe a little bit, you might know Myers-Briggs a little bit. In setting the environment for high performance decision making, where everyone is including their ideas and insights, what would that manager as facilitator need to do or be aware of to fully engage that HSP personality who I'm sensing, and please correct me if I'm wrong,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sensing that they are maybe a little bit more shy, can be talked over, and maybe even bullied into a decision process that they're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Having worked in corporate environments for most of my career, that was one of the things that I very often would be sitting in a manager's meeting. It could be because there was some breakage going on in the environment. We needed to have it fixed immediately, or there was a big decision-making process that was going on about a project or so forth. I think managers may not know that person A or B is highly sensitive just simply by looking at, but I think you can observe behaviors that would indicate that this person is not comfortable being put on the spot, right? Necessarily, okay, you're going around the room for ideas. They may not be the person who is going to jump up first and say, hey, I've got a great idea. The sensitive person is going to be that person that is going to observe what's going on in the room. They're going to listen to the ideas. They're going to be processing what's going on as the ideas are bandied back and forth. And what they may be doing is formulating an idea, formulating a response, but they're collecting data about it. This is one of the things about highly sensitive people. And maybe managers will be able to detect this based about how quickly they make decisions, right? They're very thoughtful, and they're very, like I said earlier, deep processors. So what they're doing is they're deep diving within themselves to what they think should be something that they may present. So if a manager is one of those kind that is looking for quick answers, that is looking for quick responses, the highly sensitive person is going to be put in a position in which they are contrary to their thought processing, okay, the way they do the thought processing. And it might be better, instead of trying to get an answer directly from them at that moment when there's sort of heated discussions going on, is at a break, walking over and taking them to the side and asking them, what is your opinion? How do you feel this is going? How do you think we should proceed here? What's your thoughts on this? Which would be a much more comfortable thing, because at that point, even still, they may not have formulated a complete thought that they want to contribute, but they will give you feedback about where they are in their process. And as you've indicated, highly sensitive people, about 70% of highly sensitive people are introverts. About 30% are extroverts, but they're extroverts kind of with an asterisk. They still need time to process things. They still follow all the characteristics I've mentioned before, but they're a little bit more outgoing, maybe a little bit more gregarious, a little more sociable, and so forth. So there is a break even within the highly sensitive group of who is introverted and who's not. And there's a lot of us, like myself, who are naturally introverted, but tend to be ambiverted when they are in situations where I need to get out and talk, or I need to present myself and so forth and so on. So I can play both roles. But that's how I would approach it if I was a manager in a meeting and there was maybe one especially quiet individual in there that was one of your top people or whatever, or one of the people that you're counting on to get inputs from. That might be an indication.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt you here, but one of the things that we discussed about in high-level decision-making is the importance for group behavior norms and ground rules. So what I'm hearing, possibly, is that, in creating ground rules so everyone is participating thoroughly, then if there's agenda topics that are going to be discussed as part of the decision-making process, that those need to go out well in advance so that this person has time to consider their thinking. Or there could be a situation where, you develop a group ground rule where there's no cross-talking in groups, that a person fully is able to express their thought without interruptions.
Yeah.
Can you think of another ground rule, like, for example, one that I expressed as non-negotiable for me when I'm facilitating group decision-making is that there will be no repercussions for sharing your thoughts, observations, insights, feelings. Would this be valuable for the HSP personality so that more, I guess, the speaking part of the personality is able to come forward and really share important insights that, quite frankly, those who are less aware of their environment, they just kind of go and plow through work, can be heard.
Yeah. Okay. Let me stop right here and say just one thing real quick, sort of before I move into that.
Right.
Is let's put some perspective here. If out of 10 people, 2, maybe 3 in any setting will be highly sensitive. So they're not the majority, okay, but they're certainly not a small minority, which you probably would never see a highly sensitive person in a corporate environment. So I understand. As I was writing my blog over the years, I have had several opportunities to write about work environments and having reflected back on my career.
Right.
And I realize that it's difficult sometimes to sort of cater to a specific smaller group, but the things that you just mentioned would be perfect. A highly sensitive person would like to walk into a meeting knowing what the agenda is going to be. They would like to walk into a meeting knowing what the topics are going to be and the objectives are. It's when things become ambiguous, right, and competitive and aggressive and that kind of almost chaotic and disharmonious type of meeting is going to put a highly sensitive person into a mode in which they're really not going to be able to be effective. That is, they're going to be more concerned about what's going on, the emotion in the room that's happening between people, because the facilitator, the leader, has not taken, as you said, with those examples you gave, control of the meeting and how it's being run and how it's at least giving some deference to people of different personality types and how they interact with each other and so forth and what they do best. But those things that you mentioned, I think would be excellent ideas going into a meeting and especially for a highly sensitive person to have some sense of what purpose the meeting has. Meaning is a big thing for highly sensitive people, meaning in work, meaning in life, meaning and doing, providing objectives and goals and so forth. So to have some sense of that going into a meeting would be a great thing for highly sensitive people to have.
So to kind of reiterate, there's the type of manager who says, these are our group norms, bam, they lay it on the team.
Right.
And then, especially we're seeing many more cross-functional teams develop.
Yes.
And managers taking those cross-functional teams to make complex decisions that can be taken into planning. So from the framework of, how people are, basic personalities, I mean, you could get that directive thing and say, these are our ground rules and this is the way it's going to be. And then you have that situation where everyone on the team also contributes their insights as to what would be really important for them to be able to stay out of conflict.
Right.
And to be able to, move the decision-making process forward in a civil way. So developing group norms, there are some that I say are non-negotiable, like we will not have repercussions for sharing our insights.
Right.
And everybody signs off on that. To engage the HSP person in that conversation, then what I'm hearing is that part of that manager's presentation of that piece of the facilitated process would be explaining what group norms are, be explaining what ground rules are and how important it is for that manager to hear from the group as to what they believe is important, because we know
Right.
no two groups are ever the same.
Yeah, exactly.
You might have 3, like you say, out of 10 people, you might have 3 people who are HSP, or you could have 50% of the people who are HSP. You just never know,
Right.
Depending on the type of group. So setting that conversation up, what would the HSP personality want to know from the manager going into that co-creative framework of developing ground rules and group norms?
Well, as much information that can be imparted about the objectives, I think would be very important. Setting a tonality for the meeting, as you were talking about earlier, would be good as well, because that way they're prepared. I think the idea with highly sensitive people is this, and I know that it's difficult to do if you're managing a group of different personalities. And I mean, I think as what we do, like we do with our schooling, is we've averaged and sort of make our focus on the norm, or what we consider to be a norm, and everybody has to conform to that. And that seems to be what happens a lot of times in corporate environments too, because you imagine the different challenges you would have if you're managing 50 different personality types and you're trying to figure which is the best way to do it. I think the objectives that you are talking about is the way you set the meeting up. You set the ground rules up for what it is, as long as they're familiar with that, they understand what the objectives are. And this is where this to me is kind of on the managers. Know the people that you're managing, know the people that you're working with, know a little bit about them, so you can sort of sample that by just conversation with them and kind of get a feel for working with them, how they're going to react to things. Highly sensitive people are not difficult to figure out. I think in terms of who's highly sensitive and who isn't. So if you've given a performance review to somebody and they've taken especially hard because you gave some criticism, they might be a highly sensitive person. If you've given them some objectives to do and they seem to be sort of perfection oriented because they're trying to do the most conscientious job possible, they're probably a highly sensitive person. So there are little clues that tell you that that person is highly sensitive. And being aware of how they process things and how they operate, even within your ground rules, will help you in terms of getting the most from them. Because the idea here is you're going to have people in that room of, let's say it's 10 people, you're going to have people in that room that are going to be able to quickly grasp what's going on and start kicking ideas out right away. And they don't care if you like them or not, they'll just spit them out. And they're basically doing a shotgun approach to it, right? Whereas contrast that with a highly sensitive person who's very conscientious, very thoughtful, and is processing to get the best solution that they can figure out. Not 50 solutions, but the best solution that they can come up with. And I think that idea for the manager, for the leader, for the facilitator, is to understand that their output to you may not be in the meeting. It may be half an hour later. It may be a day later. But because they didn't contribute something didn't mean they didn't care, that they were not paying attention, that, because it's quite the opposite. They're very deeply involved in trying to give the best possible output to you that they can possibly do. So there has to be kind of a two-way awareness about how this works. And if we're talking specifically about highly sensitive people and understanding how to get the most of them, because they're highly creative, highly conscientious, and highly thoughtful people, you've got to give them that space to do that and work within that. So understand you don't need to redo the ground rules, but you have to understand that within the framework of those ground rules, that a highly sensitive person may not output to you the same as, let's say, an extroverted, hard-driven type A individual. They may not do the same thing where you're going to have solutions in your hand within 5 minutes of the question being posed.
Right. Well, and that's so true. And I think you've really added a real dimension to this understanding of the people that you're facilitating, how important that is, so that you're providing the groundwork, ground rules, and norms that make it happen. So this has been very valuable for me, Bill. And I want to thank you for your insights, because we're getting close to our time now.
Okay.
So thank you so much for being here and sharing this valuable information.
Thank you, Diane. Appreciate you having me. It was great to be here.
All right. Those of you watching today, and to recap, HSPs are known to be highly observant, intuitive, thoughtful, compassionate, empathetic, conscious, loyal, and creative team members. In fact, managers consistently rate people with higher sensitivity as their top contributors. So this conversation has been valuable for me. And if you also found this valuable, please text agree into the chat. And if you have a question for Bill, please put that into chat now too, with your preferred email so Bill can respond to you personally. We're getting close to the end of our time for today's topic. And as a reminder, do send me a message if you would like the Accountable Decision Making webinar playback link. Our next topic, we are also focusing on tips you learned from the webinar for building community collaborations composed of government, nonprofits, local businesses, and other community organizations that come together to solve unique community problems and for innovating new opportunities. Our guest is Tiger's licensed nonprofit consultant, Megan Fries. Our topic is how to build accountability into community collaboratives. You won't want to miss this. I want to thank you for your time and attention today, and I am so thrilled so many of you have joined us. As we go forward, here's to your success.
Thank you for attending our webcast today. At Tigers, we've helped conscious leaders build more cooperation among employees and collaboration between departments for over 25 years. Tell your friends about our topic today. They can join us regularly by subscribing to our newsletter on the web at corevalues.com.